February 20th, 1943, north of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert battlefield. But what the German tank commanders witnessed that day would defy every principle of armored warfare they had learned. The battle reports would never fully capture the phenomenon that unfolded before their eyes. American Sherman tanks executing maneuvers that defied everything Wehrmacht doctrine declared impossible without visual signals. Through the choking dust and acrid smoke of the North African battlefield, 5 Sherman tanks, separated by broken terrain with no line of sight between them, converged on German positions with timing that seemed almost supernatural. There were no flags waving in the desert wind, no signal flares arcing through the sky, no dispatch riders racing desperately between vehicles on motorcycles. Yet these American tanks moved as a single organism, each crew covering blind spots that others could not see, each commander knowing exactly where their comrades were positioned in the swirling chaos of battle. The German crews in their Panzer IVs, equipped with what they believed were state-of-the-art Fug 5 radios, struggled desperately to hear their own company leaders through the overwhelming static that plagued their amplitude modulation systems. The 10-watt German transmitters, considered cutting-edge by 1930s standards, could barely penetrate more than a few hundred meters when the tanks were moving across the battlefield. Most German tanks carried only receivers, rendering their crews unable to report what they observed or call for desperately needed help when the situation deteriorated. The Americans were operating with technology that the Germans did not even know existed. Every single American tank carried frequency modulation radios with crystal-controlled precision, 25 watts of transmission power, and clarity that cut through engine noise and battlefield chaos like a knife slicing through paper. From 8,000 miles away, in Detroit's bustling assembly lines, the most decisive technological advantage of World War II was revealing itself, not in the thickness of armor plating or the caliber of main guns, but in the invisible electromagnetic waves that connected every American tank crew in ways the Wehrmacht had never imagined possible. The transformation that would change the course of armored warfare began on July 22, 1941. When the United States Army standardized the Signal Corps radio sets, SCR-508, SCR-528, and SCR-538 for installation in all medium tanks. While German forces were advancing through the Soviet Union, using tactics that desperately depended on radio communication between command vehicles, American engineers at the Galvin Manufacturing Company, which would later become known as Motorola, were perfecting frequency modulation technology that would render German communication systems obsolete almost overnight. The engineering team included visionaries like Daniel E. Noble, who conceived the revolutionary application of FM technology in military vehicles, and Henrik Magneski, the principal RF engineer, who solved the complex technical challenges of installing sophisticated electronics in the harsh, violent environment of a combat tank. Their creation weighed 181 pounds and transformed every Sherman tank into a node in what would become the world's first true battlefield network. The BC-604 transmitter generated 25 watts of power, 2.5 times the output of the German Fug 5 system. Operating in the 20.0 to 27.9 MHz frequency range, it provided 10 preset channels with crystal-controlled stability that remained rock-solid even under the most demanding combat conditions. The dual BC-603 receivers in the SCR-508 system allowed commanders to monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously, a capability that would prove absolutely decisive in the heat of combat operations. The real revolution, however, lay in frequency modulation itself. Edwin Armstrong's groundbreaking FM technology, licensed exclusively to the military, eliminated the static and interference that plagued amplitude modulation systems like a plague, while German tank radios picked up every electrical discharge as maddening noise that obscured crucial communications. American FM radios delivered crystal clear voice communication even during the most intense artillery barrages, when the very air seemed to crackle with electrical interference. November 8, 1942. Operation Torch brought American armor to the scorching battlefields of North Africa. The 2nd Armored Division's tanks rolled off landing craft near Safi and Fadala, each one equipped with SCR-508 radios that would soon demonstrate their overwhelming superiority over German communications in ways that would shock Wehrmacht commanders. The Afrika Korps, despite being the Wehrmacht's most experienced and battle-hardened armored force, operated under severe communication limitations that would prove catastrophic against this new American capability. A standard German tank platoon of 5 vehicles included only 1 or 2 tanks with full FOG-5 transceivers capable of both transmitting and receiving vital battlefield information. The remaining tanks carried only FOG-2 receivers. They could hear orders crackling through the static, but they could not respond or report enemy positions that might save their comrades' lives. German tank platoons functioned through rigid military hierarchy, with the platoon leader transmitting orders that subordinate tanks acknowledged through actions rather than words, like a deadly game of charades played at lethal speeds. When German command tanks were destroyed, easily identified by their multiple antenna arrays that made them priority targets, entire platoons lost coordination instantly, becoming isolated fighting units rather than coordinated teams. This vulnerability would prove absolutely catastrophic against American forces, where every single tank could assume command functions at a moment's notice, creating a redundancy that German doctrine had never contemplated. The Battle of Kasserine Pass, February 14th to 24th, 1943, provided the first major demonstration of American radio superiority in large-scale combat. Though tactically the battle resulted in a German victory, it revealed capabilities that stunned Wehrmacht observers and would haunt German tactical thinking for the remainder of the war. During the confused and desperate fighting, scattered elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division maintained perfect coordination across 50 miles of chaotic battlefield, a feat that German commanders considered impossible. Tank crews who had never met face-to-face coordinated complex attacks, warned each other of approaching threats, and called for precise artillery support through crystal-clear FM communications that cut through the noise of battle like nothing the Germans had ever experienced. German signals intelligence units, frantically intercepting American transmissions, noted with growing alarm the exceptional clarity and coordination they observed. The 10th Panzer Division's intelligence section reported with barely concealed concern that American units maintained perfect communication at ranges where German radios produced only useless static. More disturbing still was the gradual realization that every American tank appeared capable of full transmission capabilities, not just designated command vehicles. This discovery shattered fundamental assumptions about how armored units could and should operate in combat situations. The German FOG-5 radios, operating on amplitude modulation in the 27.0 to 33.3 MHz range, suffered from fundamental limitations that became more apparent with each engagement. The 10-watt transmitter struggled to reach 2 to 3 kilometers even in ideal conditions, dropping to mere hundreds of meters when vehicles were moving across rough terrain. Every spark plug firing, every electrical motor running, every track movement generated interference that AM systems could not filter out, creating a cacophony of noise that drowned out vital communications. September 1943 brought American armor to the mountainous terrain of Italy, where the challenging landscape should have negated American radio advantages according to conventional military wisdom. Instead, FM technology proved even more valuable in conditions that rendered German AM radios completely useless. The SCR-508's frequency modulation handled the multipath interference created by mountain valleys far better than amplitude modulation systems, which were designed for flatter terrain. American tanks coordinated complex movements through terrain where visual signals were impossible, and German radios failed completely. During the grueling advance toward Cassino, American armored units demonstrated capabilities that defied every principle of German military understanding. Tank platoons separated by entire ridgelines coordinated precision attacks with timing that German doctrine insisted required direct visual contact between units. The 1st Armored Division's after-action reports described routine coordination at distances where German radios produced nothing but maddening static, creating a technological gap that German commanders struggled even to comprehend, let alone counter effectively. June 6, 1944, as Sherman tanks rolled off landing craft onto the contested beaches of Normandy, their SCR-508 radios maintained constant contact with naval fire support vessels offshore, enabling coordination that would have been impossible with German technology. However, the brutal hedgerow fighting that followed revealed a critical gap in American communications. Tank radios operated on different frequencies than infantry radios, creating a dangerous communication void. The infantry's SCR-300 radios operated on 40.0 to 48.0 MHz, completely incompatible with the tank radio's 20.0 to 27.9 MHz range. This communication gap proved deadly in the Bocage countryside, where German infantry armed with Panzerfausts could approach American tanks, while nearby American infantry had no way to warn the tank crews of the approaching threat. American innovation solved this critical problem within weeks of identifying it. Tank crews began mounting EE-8 field telephones in ammunition boxes welded directly to tank exteriors, wired directly to internal communications systems. By Operation Cobra in late July, this simple but revolutionary modification had transformed tank-infantry cooperation from a dangerous coordination challenge into a seamless tactical advantage. July 25th to 30th, 1944, Operation Cobra demonstrated the full, devastating potential of American radio superiority in large-scale offensive operations. The 2nd Armored Division, commanded by Major General Edward H. Brooks, coordinated over 200 Sherman tanks through radio networks that enabled unprecedented levels of battlefield control and tactical flexibility. German defenders from the Panzer Lehr Division faced an enemy that seemed to possess supernatural battlefield awareness. American tanks responded instantly to threats reported by other units miles away, creating a web of mutual support that German commanders had never encountered. Artillery strikes, coordinated through tank radio networks, arrived within minutes of target identification, creating a tempo of operations that German forces could not match. The contrast with German capabilities had become stark and demoralizing. Panzer Lehr, once Germany's premier armored division and the pride of the Wehrmacht, had been reduced to what could only be described as communication poverty. Most tanks operated without any radios whatsoever, depending entirely on visual signals in terrain where visibility rarely exceeded 100 meters. The few functioning radios suffered from constant interference and severely limited range that prevented any effective coordination between units. The irony of this situation was profound and tragic for German forces. Germany had pioneered the use of radio communication in armored warfare during the interwar period. Heinz Guderian, the brilliant architect of blitzkrieg tactics, had insisted on radio equipment in tanks since the 1920s, understanding that rapid armored advances required reliable communication between units. His influential book, Achtung Panzer, published in 1937, had emphasized communication as absolutely essential to successful armored operations. Guderian had personally developed radio communication systems that enabled tank officers to coordinate complex attacks with unprecedented precision. He understood better than anyone that rapid armor advances required reliable, instant communication between all units. Yet by 1943, German production statistics revealed the full scope of this crisis with brutal clarity. In 1943, Germany manufactured approximately 5,700 medium tanks, but fewer than 2,000 fugue transceivers. Many of these precious radios went to command vehicles and assault guns, leaving regular tank units desperately short of the communication equipment they needed to survive on increasingly hostile battlefields. Soviet tank forces suffered from even worse communication poverty throughout most of the war. The T-34, despite being the most produced Allied tank design, typically entered combat without any radio equipment whatsoever. Soviet doctrine relied heavily on flag signals and pre-battle planning, with catastrophic results against German forces during the devastating defeats of 1941, when communication failures led to complete tactical breakdowns. By 1943, Lend-Lease agreements provided some relief to Soviet forces. American radios, including SCR-508 sets, equipped Soviet command tanks, but even by the war's end, only approximately 25% of Soviet tanks carried any radio equipment at all. This comparison highlighted the magnitude of American achievement. While the Soviet Union struggled to equip even 1/4 of their tanks with basic radios, America had achieved 100% deployment of sophisticated FM communication systems. Motorola's Chicago factory represented American industrial mobilization at its absolute peak efficiency. Before the war, the company had manufactured car radios for civilian consumers. Converting to military production required complete retooling of assembly lines and solving unprecedented technical challenges under wartime pressure. Each SCR-508 radio required 2,748 individual components, manufactured to exacting military standards that far exceeded civilian requirements. The BC-604 transmitter alone contained 474 capacitors and 385 resistors, each one precisely calibrated for military service. Crystal oscillators had to maintain perfect frequency stability despite extreme temperature variations and the violent vibrations of combat operations. The production statistics tell an invaluable story of American industrial might applied to military necessity. 1942 saw 3,800 SCR-508 family radios produced. 1943 brought 11,400 units. 1944 achieved 24,000 units. Total wartime production exceeded 50,000 tank radio sets. This production miracle ensured that all 49,324 Sherman tanks manufactured during the war received sophisticated radio equipment, an achievement that no other combatant nation even approached. Every American tank crew fought with the knowledge that they were connected to every other American tank crew on the battlefield. The SCR-508's advantages extended far beyond simple frequency modulation technology. Crystal-controlled frequency stability meant that tank crews could preset communication channels before battle and maintain perfect alignment despite the most violent combat conditions. German FUG-5 radios, using variable capacitor tuning systems, constantly drifted off frequency during operations, requiring constant readjustment that diverted attention from combat tasks. The dual receiver configuration allowed commanders to monitor their platoon communication net and company command net simultaneously, creating unprecedented situational awareness. Orders flowed down the chain of command instantly, while commanders maintained continuous awareness of subordinate unit situations. The BC-606 intercom system integrated seamlessly with radio communications, allowing all crew members to alert commanders to threats immediately. Throat microphones and noise-canceling headphones enabled crystal-clear communication even during the most intense combat operations. Many German tanks lacked intercom systems entirely. forcing crews to communicate through touch signals or shouting over engine noise, a primitive system that proved completely inadequate for complex modern warfare. The tactical advantages of universal radio deployment transformed American armored doctrine in fundamental ways. The combat command structure, flexible task forces organized for specific missions, depended entirely on reliable communications between diverse units. American commanders could create ad hoc battle groups from different battalions and divisions, confident that they could coordinate effectively through compatible radio systems. This operational flexibility completely baffled German commanders, who remained bound to rigid organizational structures necessitated by their limited communications capabilities. They could not adapt to American tactical innovation because they lacked the technological foundation that made such innovation possible. During the Battle of Ericourt in September 1944, the 4th Armored Division faced multiple German Panzer brigades equipped with technically superior Panther tanks. The Germans possessed every conventional advantage in armor thickness and firepower specifications, but American radio coordination proved absolutely decisive. Every Sherman tank could report enemy positions instantly to supporting units. Tank destroyers received precise targeting information from observation tanks they could not even see. Artillery observers in Sherman command tanks called in devastating barrages within minutes of identifying targets. Over 3 weeks of continuous fighting, the 4th Armored Division destroyed 281 German armored vehicles, while losing only 41 Sherman tanks, a 7-to-1 kill ratio that completely defied technical specifications and proved that coordination could overcome individual platform superiority. Throughout the entire war, German intelligence services failed catastrophically to grasp the true significance of American communication superiority. Combat reports regularly mentioned American coordination capabilities, but consistently attributed them to superior training rather than technological advantages. A captured German intelligence assessment from September 1944 stated with complete misunderstanding, "American tank units demonstrate excellent radio discipline and coordination." This appears to result from extensive training programs and rigid communication procedures. The report completely missed the fundamental technological advantage that made such coordination possible in the first place. German tactical doctrine never adapted to counter American capabilities because German commanders never fully understood what they were facing. They continued targeting supposed command tanks based on antenna configurations, not realizing that every Sherman tank could coordinate battlefield responses with equal effectiveness. March 1945. As American forces approached the Rhine River, their communications superiority reached its absolute zenith. The capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen demonstrated the incredible speed of American command and control systems. When the 9th Armored Division discovered the bridge intact and undefended, radio reports reached 1st Army headquarters within minutes of the discovery. Within 1 hour, entire divisions across the front were shifting resources to exploit this unexpected opportunity. German forces, dependent on telephone lines that American aircraft had systematically destroyed, could not respond with comparable speed to this strategic development. American radio coordination created an impenetrable defense of the bridgehead that German counterattacks could not penetrate. Tank platoons from completely different battalions integrated seamlessly into the defense, coordinating fires through radio networks with unprecedented effectiveness. Pause. April 1945, the encirclement of the Ruhr Pocket demonstrated the culmination of American communications superiority in large-scale operations. American armored columns from the 1st and 9th Armies coordinated a complex double envelopment entirely through radio communications, trapping enormous German forces through superior coordination rather than superior firepower. Inside the pocket, 325,000 German troops found themselves completely trapped, partly because their communication systems had collapsed under American pressure. American fighter bombers, guided by radio-equipped forward air controllers, systematically destroyed German communication nodes, leaving Wehrmacht units unable to coordinate any effective response to the encirclement. Field Marshal Walter Model's final messages before complete communication failure revealed the full scope of German desperation. No contact with adjacent units, no communication with higher headquarters. Fighting continues, but coordination has become impossible. These words captured the essence of Germany's technological defeat, not overcome by superior weapons, but by superior connections. American radio superiority profoundly affected the psychological experience of tank warfare for crews on both sides. American tank crews fought with the absolute knowledge that they were never truly alone on the battlefield. Even when physically isolated by terrain or tactical circumstances, they remained connected through invisible radio waves that bound them to their comrades. German tank crews experienced the opposite. Profound isolation that made every engagement feel like an individual battle within larger conflicts they could barely comprehend. After Germany's surrender, American technical intelligence teams conducted comprehensive evaluations of captured German equipment. Their findings confirmed what combat experience had already demonstrated. German tanks often possessed superior armor and armament specifications, but catastrophically inferior communications capabilities that negated their technical advantages. U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Report number 176 concluded with devastating clarity. German tank communications equipment was approximately 5 years behind American systems in development. The absence of frequency modulation technology, severely limited radio distribution, and poor electrical interference suppression created critical vulnerabilities that German forces could never overcome through tactical innovation alone. The radio superiority of Sherman tanks established fundamental principles that continue to govern armored warfare today. Modern main battle tanks carry communication suites that trace their technological lineage directly to the SCR-508 system, digital rather than analog, but fundamentally based on the same principles of universal deployment and reliable coordination that American engineers pioneered during World War II. The German Bundeswehr, rebuilt in the 1950s with hard-learned lessons from their wartime experience, prioritized communications above almost all other considerations. Every Leopard tank manufactured since then has carried comprehensive radio systems as standard equipment. A Bundeswehr training manual explicitly acknowledges the lesson. The defeat of superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles with superior radios teaches us that information dominance outweighs platform superiority in modern warfare. Modern conflicts continue to validate this fundamental lesson. During the 1991 Gulf War, coalition forces with superior communications systematically destroyed Iraqi forces equipped with individually superior Soviet-designed tanks, but inferior radio systems. In 2003, American forces again demonstrated conclusively that network-centric warfare defeats platform-centric warfare every time. The story of American Sherman tank radio superiority represents a complete victory in the electromagnetic spectrum that proved more decisive than any advantage in armor thickness or firepower specifications. German tank crews fought their war partially blind to this technological revolution, discovering far too late that every Sherman tank was not merely a fighting vehicle, but a node in history's first true battlefield network. The SCR-508 radio system transformed the M4 Sherman from an adequate medium tank into a component of a weapons system that included every other American tank on the battlefield. This transformation proved more decisive than any possible improvement in armor or firepower could have achieved through traditional military thinking. Every Sherman tank carried the tools of ultimate victory, not just in its 75mm gun or sloped armor, but in the 181 pounds of radio equipment that connected its crew to every other American tank crew fighting the same war. This connection created a collective intelligence that no individual German tank, regardless of its superiority in armor or firepower, could possibly match through isolated action. The invisible electromagnetic waves carried by SCR-508 radios proved more powerful than the armor-piercing rounds fired by German 88mm guns. The ability to coordinate instantly, to share critical information without delay, to fight as a unified force rather than as individual vehicles. This invisible advantage determined victory more surely than any visible superiority in traditional military hardware. The Sherman tank's radio superiority changed warfare forever, establishing the enduring principle that in modern combat, connection equals survival, while isolation equals defeat. German forces discovered this fundamental reality on battlefields across 3 continents, learning too late that Americans possessed not just overwhelming numerical superiority, but technological superiority in the dimension that mattered most, the ability to fight as one coordinated force, rather than as thousands of isolated individuals. America had built not just 49,324 Sherman tanks, but 49,324 nodes in the world's first armored battlefield network. The revolution in military affairs that historians identify with modern network-centric warfare actually began in 1942, when the first Sherman tank equipped with an SCR-508 radio entered combat. From that historic moment, warfare changed forever, and the connected would always overcome the isolated.